5:59 p.m., Monroe Headquarters, Midtown Manhattan. The lobby gleamed like a promise no one could afford to break. Marble floors polished to a mirror finish, steel columns catching the fading golden light, the kind of corporate palace that whispered power with every echoing footstep. And tonight, every light was on. In 31 seconds, Serafina Monroe, CEO of Monroe Industries, youngest in the company's history, woman of steel reputation, and zero tolerance for improvisation, would walk into the most important meeting of her career. She wasn't late. She was never late. She simply entered at the exact second she meant to, with the kind of precision that made lesser executives nervous. The Chinese delegation had arrived early. Of course they had. Mr. Zhao, billionaire investor, known shark behind 3 of East Asia's most ruthless mergers, was upstairs with his team. Waiting. The billion-dollar acquisition of Linhua Biotech would finalize tonight if nothing went wrong. Serafina descended the marble staircase heels, tapping like clock hands against the stone. Her assistant whispered updates beside her, but she barely registered the words. Everything was on script. Everything was crack. It came from above, a sharp, crystalline snap. Then, shh, thump, glass. A jagged piece of chandelier the size of a forearm broke loose from the atrium ceiling. Time bent for half a heartbeat as it fell, spiraling. A janitor pushing a cleaning cart across the lower landing looked up. He moved fast, too fast for a man carrying a mop. With one swift motion, he reached out and caught the shard before it hit the floor, or the intern standing frozen in its path. Silence rippled through the lobby. Serafina stopped mid-step. Her eyes flicked to the janitor, then to the intern, pale, shaken, unhurt. The janitor nodded like it was nothing. Serafina didn't speak. She just stared. Their eyes met. Brown, steady, calm in the chaos. He set the glass shard gently into a disposal bag, checked on the intern, then resumed pushing his cart toward the far hallway like catching falling death from the ceiling was just another part of the job. No fuss, no glory, no name tag. The elevator chimed. Serafina blinked the moment passing. She turned sharp as ever and stepped in. She had $1 billion deal to close. But something lodged in her mind like a splinter. That man. 11:07 p.m. Same building, janitorial wing, lower level. The hallways were quiet now. The glass had been swept, bagged, and documented. A temporary repair team had sealed off the ceiling panel. Noah Bell moved silently through the corridors, mop in hand, headphones draped around his neck, but silent. His routine was muscle memory by now. Strip, scrub, buff, reset. But tonight something tugged at the edges of his attention. The executive conference floor was still active. Voices behind frosted glass. Footsteps, pacing. He knew better than to linger. Yet, he paused at the far end of the corridor. Someone had left the media display system running in the open lounge, a preloaded video briefing maybe left for tomorrow's staff. The volume was low, but a phrase caught Noah's ear. A voice, measured, deliberate, speaking fluent Mandarin. Woman Renwei, Zhanlu Lian He Ying Yi Xin, Renwei He Xin. Noah froze. His breath caught. Slowly he stepped closer to the screen. The face on the screen was older now, lined with wealth and experience. But the voice, the cadence. He knew it. Zhou Ming, former diplomat, now advisor to Linhua's board. The same man who 10 years ago in Beijing had tried to corner a Southeast Asia clean energy trade deal. The same deal Noah had helped block because Zhou's terms would have buried half a dozen smaller nations in debt. Noah remembered the fallout, the headlines, the silence that followed. He remembered walking away from it all, leaving behind everything he was trained to do. Now, Zhou was here, in this building, across a conference table from a woman who believed translation apps and time limits could hold together global trust. He looked down at his janitor's uniform, then at the monitor again, and finally at the book poking out of his cleaning cart. Principles of International Investment Law, dog-eared, annotated in 3 languages. Sadie had spilled juice on page 114 last week. He sighed, then gently slid the book back into the canvas bag beside the disinfectant. 12:41 a.m. Break room lights dimmed. Noah sat alone, sipping cheap coffee. His reflection shimmered in the vending machine glass across from him. He hadn't spoken Mandarin in months, not since helping Sadie rehearse her school play some panda puppet show with 2 badly pronounced lines. He tapped a rhythm on the table, a nervous habit. Then from the hallway speaker came the faint hum of elevator doors closing. His shift was over, but tomorrow something told him tomorrow would not go to script. Chapter 2. Invisible Hands. Tuesday, 7 a.m. The sky over Manhattan had barely shaken off its morning haze, but inside Monroe HQ the tension was already awake. The boardroom was lit like a television set, bright, precise, clinical. No place for error. No place for emotion. Serafina Monroe stood at the head of the oval table, tablet in hand, scrolling through the final prep notes. Her expression was unreadable, half ice, half steel. Not even the sharp crease in her tailored navy suit dared to shift without permission. Her assistant, Eli, hovered behind her, voice low and cautious. "We've triple-checked the seating presentation files are mirrored on both sides of the room. Catering is delayed 5 minutes, not relevant." She cut in without looking up. "What about the interpreter?" Eli hesitated. Still no update. "She hasn't called in. She confirmed last night. She had dinner at Shiro. Shellfish. They're saying possible anaphylaxis. She was taken to the ER around midnight." Serafina finally looked up. The backup. Stuck on the Cross Bronx Expressway, multi-car pileup. She's at least 45 minutes out. A slow, sharp breath filled Serafina's lungs. The room around her blurred for a moment, just a moment, as the full weight of the morning shifted on its axis. "Tell legal, we may need to delay." Eli blinked. "You're delaying the meeting?" She didn't answer. Instead, she turned to the tall windows overlooking Midtown. The glass was flawless, but she didn't see the skyline. She saw risk. She saw headlines. She saw Zhou Ming walking out unimpressed, unreached. This wasn't just a language issue, it was a respect issue. Mr. Zhao had flown across the Pacific for a deal built on mutual understanding. And now the only thing Monroe Industries had to offer was a translation app and awkward smiles. She tapped her fingers once against the edge of the table, then strode out into the corridor without a word. The hallway outside was quiet, too quiet for her liking, polished, silent, sterile. She walked past the frosted glass conference rooms, past the framed awards and strategically placed plants, past her reflection, staring back, controlled, calculated, composed. Then she saw him. Noah Bell, the janitor. The same one from last night. He was wiping the floor-to-ceiling windows at the far end of the corridor, one hand on a cloth, the other on the squeegee movement, slow and steady. Their eyes met again. He didn't look away. "Rough morning," he asked casually, like they were 2 neighbors chatting over a fence. She was already moving past him when she paused. There was something off. Not in a threatening way. More like a misfiled document, something that didn't quite belong in the box it was placed in. She turned to him. "You were here last night." He didn't smile, didn't nod, just said, "I work nights. Sometimes early mornings, too." She studied him for a beat longer than necessary. "You heard the glass break. I caught it. You could have been hurt." "I wasn't." She folded her arms. "You knew who Mr. Zhao was last night." His eyes flicked up sharp. "I saw the video playing," he said slowly. "Recognized the voice." "You speak Mandarin Beijing dialect," he replied. "Lived there 10 years." Her brows knit together. Doing what he just shrugged. "A few things." There was something about the way he spoke, clear-grounded and yet unwilling to offer more than she asked. It was both frustrating and, oddly, refreshing. She exhaled sharply, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. Our interpreter's in the hospital, the backup's stuck on the freeway, and Mr. Zhao is expecting fluency. Noah leaned against the window frame. So, Google Translate. She didn't answer, but the flicker in her eyes said everything. He let the silence hang, then said, "You know what he said yesterday?" She didn't move. He said, "Trust is built on cultural literacy, not just vocabulary." She blinked. "You understood that I understood what he meant." For the first time all morning, Serafina looked unsure. It wasn't a loss of control, it was the quiet horror of realizing there was no backup plan. No version of this that didn't fall apart in front of reporters, investors, and Zhou Ming's condescending smirk. "I'm not asking you to fix this," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. "I didn't offer," Noah replied. Silence again. Except now it was weighted. Not with tension, but with the possibility of a door opening where there should have only been walls. Then he added, "But I can help, if you want." She didn't speak. Not at first, because in her mind 1,000 questions sparked to life at once. Who was this man really? Why was he mopping floors when he could quote Zhao verbatim? What was he doing in her building? In her world? And more than that, why did his offer feel like a risk? She wanted to take. At last, she said carefully, "What's your name?" "Noah. Noah. What, Noah Bell?" She repeated it quietly. Let it sit on her tongue like a test. "All right, Mr. Bell, I'll need a clean shirt and a notepad for you. You'll enter as internal staff support. Keep your remarks minimal unless asked." "Understood." He nodded. "I've been invisible for 4 years. I think I can manage." Something in her chest twisted, just slightly. She turned without another word and strode back toward the boardroom. But the sound of his voice followed her like a whisper through the hall. In Mandarin. Fluent, steady, respectful. Trust begins when someone listens before they speak. The doors to conference room. A slid open with a soft, mechanical whisper. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Heads turned curious. Some confused, some annoyed. Serafina Monroe entered first every step, crisp and deliberate, her heels clicking like punctuation marks against the tile. Right behind her, not quite in her shadow but certainly not in the spotlight, walked Noah Bell. No name tag, no title. Just a pressed white shirt sleeves rolled and a calmness that didn't match the moment. The room was sleek glass walls, a 12-foot polished table, and a digital screen humming with Graph's logos and company ambitions. On one side sat Monroe Industries' top brass. On the other, 5 Chinese delegates, each expression a masterclass in controlled curiosity. And at the head sat Mr. Zhao. He didn't stand. He didn't smile. He simply observed. "Apologies for the delay," Serafina began, her voice cool but steady. "There was a last-minute change to our interpretation arrangements." Zhao lifted an eyebrow. "I see." Serafina glanced toward Noah, a subtle signal your move. Noah stepped forward. He didn't reach for a chair. He didn't shuffle nervously. He simply nodded at Mr. Zhao and spoke in fluent Mandarin, crisp and clear. "Mr. Zhao, thank you for your patience. I'm here to assist with interpretation. If that is acceptable to you and your team, we can proceed." The effect was immediate. Not just surprise, but something deeper. Recognition. Zhao leaned back slightly. A rare flicker of amusement crept into his voice. "Beijing dialect, refined, educated, not textbook." "Who are you?" Noah gave a soft smile. "Just someone who's been paying attention." Laughter. Quiet, but real. It rolled across the table like a ripple in still water. Zhao gestured lightly. "Proceed." And so they did. For the next 30 minutes, Noah stood beside Serafina and translated. But it wasn't just word for word. It wasn't robotic or stiff. He adjusted tone. He read pauses. He clarified idioms with ease. When one executive from Zhao's team made a reference to an old Sichuan proverb, Noah didn't blink. He translated not just the words, but the weight behind them. More than once, Serafina caught herself glancing sideways, watching him, watching the way the room listened when he spoke. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't trying to impress. He simply understood, and that somehow impressed them all. At one point, one of the Monroe executives whispered to another, "Who is this guy?" Neither of them answered, because honestly, no one knew. 10 minutes in, Zhao set his pen down. He looked at Serafina, then turned fully to Noah. "Tell me something, Mr. Noah Bell," Mr. Bell Zhao said, folding his hands. "What is your opinion on this merger? Not as a translator, as a man who clearly understands both systems." There was a collective breath across the room. Serafina stiffened. Noah didn't flinch. He looked Zhao in the eye and answered in Mandarin. "I think trust is not built in contract clauses. It's built in what people do when the stakes are high and the world isn't watching. I believe Monroe wants to do the right thing. But your concern about cultural dilution, about operational autonomy, those are real, and they deserve respect, not just legal reassurance." Zhao stared at him, long and hard. Then he nodded once. "One man understood me, and he cleans your windows." Serafina cleared her throat. "Mr. Bell is not part of our formal delegation." Zhao smirked. "That much is obvious." Another pause, then he turned to his team and spoke in Mandarin. "Let's continue. I want to hear what the janitor thinks next time they draft an MOU." Laughter again, and this time it didn't feel sharp. It felt alive. Noah stepped back, letting the negotiations resume. He spoke when needed. He listened when not. And Serafina. She said almost nothing, but inside everything was shifting. By the end of the hour, they had reached agreement on 3 key terms that had been stalled for weeks. The mood was almost warm as corporate diplomacy gets. The meeting adjourned with handshakes and boos. Zhao offered a final nod toward Noah. "We'll talk again." And then they were gone. Silence returned. Serafina stood at the head of the now empty table, staring at the space where Zhao had been. She didn't move. Noah stood quietly at her side. Finally, she turned to him. "Who are you?" He didn't smile this time. "I'm someone who used to sit on the other side of tables like this." "Then why are you mopping floors in my building?" He met her eyes. "Because sometimes life doesn't ask permission before it changes the script." They stared at each other. Neither blinked, and then Noah turned slowly and walked toward the door. Just before he stepped out, he glanced back and said, "Thank you for letting me speak." She didn't respond. She couldn't, because for the first time in years, Serafina Monroe was speechless, and somewhere inside her a door she didn't know was there creaked open. It started with a tweet, a grainy photo taken from behind the glass wall of Conference Room A. The caption read, "Monroe CEO brings janitor into billion-dollar deal. Dude speaks better Mandarin than our whole legal team." Wild. 12 minutes later, it was on LinkedIn. A Monroe intern, no name attached, posted about the janitor who saved the merger. It got 50,000 views before lunch. By 1 p.m., the financial blogs picked it up. From Mop to M&A, the janitor who stole the room. Anonymous hero. Delivers key moment in Monroe-Linhua deal. And by the time the sun dipped behind the Hudson River, the story had a name. Noah Bell. Monroe's switchboard lit up. Press inquiries. Board members calling in from 3 different time zones. The stock jumped 4.2% in after-hours trading. And somewhere between the praise and the panic, Serafina Monroe stood in the middle of it all, her phone buzzing nonstop, jaw-tight, spine locked straight, reading the same headline over and over again on her screen, "Janitor saves billion-dollar deal with Mandarin skills." They made it sound like a joke, a movie trailer, a fairy tale. But it wasn't funny. It was dangerous. Not because of what Noah did, but because of how the system would react. Her system. He hadn't asked for permission. He hadn't cleared it through PR, legal, HR, or any of the other gatekeepers the corporate world relied on to keep things safe. He had simply spoken, with clarity, with authority, with knowledge, and that was what scared people. That someone who wasn't supposed to be visible had taken up space and changed the narrative. She stood in her office blinds, half closed, staring at the city lights flickering like Morse code against the glass. Her assistant, Eli, stood nearby, face-pale tablet clutched tight. "There's a board call scheduled for 8 a.m. tomorrow," he said quietly. "Chairman Greaves wants to discuss—" "Containment. Containment," Serafina repeated flatly. Eli hesitated. Some of the directors are asking why someone with his background was cleaning floors. Others are asking why you let him into the room. She didn't respond right away, because part of her was asking the same thing, not with regret, but with a gnawing unease, like something long buried had just taken its first breath. She turned sharply. "Pull his personnel file. Now." Eli blinked. "HR said it's restricted. Not anymore." 10 minutes later, the file appeared on her screen. Basic HR form. Employee ID 041 Bell, night janitor. 4 years with the company. No complaints, no promotions, no requests, not even a birthday note. But attached buried beneath the standard onboarding documents was a resume. It didn't match the man who pushed a mop. Bachelor's from Harvard. Master's from Tsinghua. International Trade Fellowships. A 5-year tenure as senior advisor to the World Bank on cross-border development strategy. Authored 3 white papers on trade equity. Guest lecturer at NYU, fluent in 4 languages. She scrolled back up, reading the name again as if it might change. Noah Bell. It didn't make sense. Or rather, it made too much sense. He wasn't an accident. He was a man who had chosen invisibility. Why? Before she could answer that question, the intercom chimed. "Miss Monroe, the department heads are here." The conference room was already full when she entered. 17 executives, some seated, some standing. The air buzzed with nervous energy. A few of them glanced up with that forced, too-tight smile that said, "You've lost control of the narrative." It wasn't spoken aloud, but she heard it in every glance. Daniel Crosshead of Corporate Affairs stood, tall, pressed, and eager. His tie was too tight and his smile too polished. "We all appreciate the initiative you took yesterday," he began, faux warmth lacing every syllable. "But there's concern about protocol." Protocol, Serafina asked, already knowing where this was going. "Yes." The janitor, Mr. Bell, was not vetted for public representation. He has no media training, no disclosure agreements. If he were to speak out of turn, he didn't. But he could. The room murmured. Someone from legal added, "Technically, he breached the boundary between operational staff and executive delegation. That's a liability issue." Another chimed in. "There are procedures for this, protocols." And finally, from the back, a sharper voice. "He should be suspended pending internal review." Serafina held up a hand. The room fell silent. She walked to the head of the table. Calm, composed. But the fire behind her eyes wasn't subtle. "I'm not suspending a man for speaking a language I couldn't." No one spoke. She scanned the room. He didn't embarrass us. He rescued a negotiation on the verge of collapse. He used knowledge we failed to notice. And we're discussing him like he's a problem to manage. Cross's jaw tightened. "We're discussing the optics." "No," Serafina said. "You're discussing control." And then she did something she hadn't done in years. She let silence sit, uncomfortable, heavy. And when no one challenged her, she turned, walked out, and left 17 executives blinking after her. Back in her office, she closed the door softly behind her. Then she did something else she hadn't done in years. She looked inward. She asked herself a question she had buried for too long. What kind of system doesn't recognize someone like Noah Bell unless they speak up in front of a billionaire? And maybe deeper than that, what kind of leader lets it happen? The night settled in. Outside, headlines still screamed. Social feeds spun theories. Stockholders cheered. Critics whispered. But inside Monroe HQ, the real story had only just begun. And it wasn't about translation. It was about what happens when someone no one sees finally gets seen. Noah kept his head down as he left the building. The revolving doors whispered shut behind him, cutting off the echo of 100 voices that didn't belong to him. The air outside felt heavier than usual. Maybe it was the rain in the distance, or maybe it was the way the world suddenly knew his name. He didn't want the attention, not the stories, not the likes, not the congratulations from strangers who couldn't pronounce his daughter's name but now wanted him on their podcasts. He just wanted to go home. The train ride was quiet. He stayed near the door hands in his jacket pockets, eyes trained on the window as the city blurred past. When his phone buzzed again, he didn't look. Not this time. He stepped off at 96th Street and walked the 5 blocks in silence. Familiar sidewalks, same mural on the corner grocery, same mailbox tilted to the left like it was tired of holding everyone else's news. He reached the second-floor apartment keys, jingling just enough to announce his return. Sadie was already at the table, crayons scattered like a rainbow exploded across the wood. Her curls bounced as she looked up, face lighting up like only a 6-year-old's could. "Daddy!" she shouted, launching off the chair. He knelt to catch her, the weight of her small arms wrapping around his neck as if they could squeeze away the noise of the world. "You're home late," she mumbled into his shoulder. "I know, sweetheart. Big day." She pulled back and looked at him suspicious. Did someone spill spaghetti on the elevator again? He smiled. Not this time. She squinted. Then what? He paused. He could have lied. Told her it was just another Tuesday, another mop, another quiet hallway. But she'd know. So he said, "I helped someone say the right words in a big meeting. In another language." Sadie's eyes widened. "Did you use the panda voice?" He laughed. "No panda voice. Just the real one." She nodded as if this made perfect sense, then spun around. "I made you something." She ran back to the table and picked up a single sheet of construction paper creased in the corner, glitter glue still drying in tiny dots. She held it out like it was a masterpiece. He took it gently. In the center of the page was a drawing, crayon lines bold and simple. A man with brown hair pushing a mop across a big, shiny floor. Above him, stars. Tiny ones yellow and silver drawn with careful hands, and just beneath the picture in a child's careful handwriting, "Sometimes the cleanest people are the ones who see the most dirt." Noah stared at it. He didn't move, didn't breathe. Sadie shifted, unsure. "Do you like it?" He looked at her throat tight. "I love it," he said. She smiled like she'd just saved the world. He walked the drawing to the fridge and pinned it next to last month's spelling test and the pizza place menu. It didn't belong there. It deserved glass and gallery lighting, but that was where everything that mattered went. Sadie tugged his sleeve. "Will you still be my daddy janitor when you get famous?" He crouched next to her. "I'll always be your daddy janitor." "But Ms. Parker at school said people on the news have to wear suits." "Well," he said, thinking for a second, "maybe I'll wear a suit and carry a mop." Sadie giggled. He made grilled cheese for dinner while she told him about her class hamster escaping again and how Mr. Lewis fell asleep during story time. She didn't ask about the deal, or the media, or why a man who used to sit at conference tables now scrubbed them. But later that night, after she brushed her teeth and crawled into bed with her stuffed koala, she whispered a question into the dark. Is it bad to be really good at something and not want people to know Noah stood in the doorway, lights-dimmed heart suddenly aching? He walked over, sat beside her, smoothing her blanket. "It's not bad," he said softly. "Sometimes it just means you're waiting for the right moment." "To do what?" "To let them see you. When it matters." Sadie blinked up at him, sleepy. "Did it matter today?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, I think it did." She yawned, turning onto her side. "Okay." Her breathing slowed. Noah sat there a little longer, fingers resting on the edge of her blanket, eyes distant. It wasn't just about being seen. It was about choosing why. all those years hiding in silence, after the diagnosis, after the insurance denials, after holding her tiny hand through hospital nights when no one came to check on them because they didn't have the right plan, after watching a brilliant woman, the love of his life, slip away because treatment came too late. He'd stopped speaking then, stopped believing that words made a difference. Until today. Now the world was asking questions, reporters digging, executives calculating. Some wanted to use him, others wanted him gone, and somewhere in between a child with crayons reminded him who he really was. Not a janitor, not a translator, not a headline, just a father, trying to leave the world a little cleaner than he found it. He stood up, kissed Sadie's forehead, and turned off the light. Then, as he walked down the hallway to his room, he whispered into the quiet, "Maybe it's time." The cafe was quiet except for the low hiss of the espresso machine and the soft clink of silverware against ceramic. It was one of those tucked-away spots near Midtown that didn't have a name on the window, just the smell of burnt sugar and bitter coffee. Noah sat at a table near the back, his fingers wrapped around a chipped white mug. He'd gotten there early out of habit, not nerves, and taken the seat that faced the door. Old instincts. You never want your back to the entrance, especially when you're not sure what kind of meeting you've been invited to. It wasn't often the CEO of your building's parent company asked to meet you off record, and certainly not over lunch. He heard her heels before he saw her, measured, deliberate. Then she appeared in the doorway, Seraphina Monroe, tailored black coat over a slate-gray dress hair pulled into a no-nonsense twist. She scanned the room, once clocked him, and made her way over. Noah stood halfway. She motioned him down. "No need," she said. "We're not staging a press release." She sat across from him, placed her phone face down on the table, and removed her gloves with clinical precision. A waitress appeared and disappeared just as fast, leaving water and a promise to return. They didn't speak right away. Seraphina looked at him. Really looked. Not the way an executive evaluates a resume. More like someone studying a painting they'd walked past 100 times only to realize they'd never actually seen it. "You're not what I expected," she said. Noah gave a small smile. Most people never expect the janitor to speak Mandarin. She didn't return the smile. "I've read your file," she said, straightforward. "Harvard, Tsinghua, World Bank. 3 languages besides English. You led a trade roundtable between South Korea and the ASEAN bloc in 2015. You forgot the part where I buff floors in the West Wing and refill the vending machines." Seraphina ignored the deflection. "You didn't just save that deal. You saved the company's credibility, and you did it without asking for credit." "I didn't want credit," he said quietly. "I wanted the deal to succeed." "Why?" He paused, then looked her dead in the eye. "Because there's too much noise in the world, and not enough people listening to what's not being said. That room was about to implode over translation, but it wasn't a language issue. It was a trust issue. And trust only grows when people feel heard." She absorbed that in silence. Then she reached into her bag and slid a folder across the table. Strategic Advisor, Cultural and Cross-Border Communications. Part-time to start, remote flexible. Salary commensurate with experience, though I'm sure we'll still be underpaying you. Noah didn't touch the folder. "I don't need a title," he said. "You need a platform. I need insurance," he said, voice steady now, "and stability. For my daughter." Her expression flickered for the briefest second. Then she leaned in. "You could have asked for anything. Stock options, a department, hell, a book deal. But you stayed quiet. Why? Because when I spoke last time," he said slowly, "the system punished me for it." Seraphina narrowed her eyes. "What system?" "All of it," he said. "After my wife passed, we couldn't afford the treatment she needed because her policy had a clause about out-of-network exceptions. I filed appeals. I met with attorneys. But no one heard me. I was a case number, not a man who just lost the love of his life." He paused, swallowing hard. So I stepped back. Took a job no one would ask questions about. I wanted to raise my daughter in peace, be present, invisible, safe. Serafina's voice softened just barely. And now Noah looked down at his hands. My daughter drew a picture of me last night, said I clean the world, and I realized maybe it's time I stop hiding behind the mop. The waitress came with their food, setting down 2 plates and vanishing again. They didn't touch it. Serafina folded her hands on the table. You said something in the boardroom about not trusting a system that only sees degrees and titles. I meant it. So did I. That's why I want you on record, not just for this quarter's optics, for the culture we're trying to build, one that actually sees people. He exhaled slowly, gaze drifting toward the window where the city buzzed outside like a hive, everyone rushing, everyone important, everyone pretending not to notice the janitor in the corner. He tapped the edge of the folder twice, then looked up. You put me in that room because you had no other choice. Yes. And now I'm choosing you, she said simply. And I'm asking if you'll choose us back. The words sat between them like a mirror, not polished, not perfect, but real. Finally Noah nodded. I'll take the offer, on one condition. Serafina raised an eyebrow. No PR tour, no public hero story, no magazine features. I don't want my daughter to Google my name and find 20 versions of a man I don't recognize. Serafina nodded. Done. He reached for the folder, slid it toward himself. She stood. Congratulations, Mr. Bell. He stood too. Noah. A flicker of a smile. All right. Noah. She turned to leave, but paused at the door. And, for what it's worth, she said, glancing back, I'm sorry, no one listened when it mattered. He met her gaze. They are now. The elevator ride to the top floor was silent save for the faint hum of the motor and the distant ticking of Noah's watch. He stood alone, dressed in a dark blazer that still felt unfamiliar on his shoulders, holding a manila folder in one hand and the weight of judgment in the other. Outside, the skyline stretched wide, indifferent. Inside, everything was narrowing. He didn't need to ask what this was. He'd seen it before in polished rooms across Shanghai, Brussels, Nairobi, when a man was invited not to speak but to defend his right to exist in a room. Today, that man was him. When the elevator opened, a receptionist barely glanced up before gesturing to the walnut-paneled doors at the end of the hallway. They're waiting, she said flatly. He nodded once. He didn't expect applause, but the coldness still stung. He walked down the hall past oil portraits of past board chairs, past Legacy and Legacy's dust, and stopped in front of the doors. He took one breath, then another, and pushed them open. The room was full. The board sat in 2 rows like judges at a tribunal, 12 in total. Suits pressed pens, ready expressions unreadable. Some he recognized, others he didn't. But none looked curious. Serafina stood at the head of the table, poised calm as if carved from focus. Daniel Cross was already speaking, voice smooth and crisp. And while we acknowledge Mr. Bell's contribution to the Linhua negotiation, the question before us is broader. It is about precedent policy and the professional optics of this organization. Noah stepped inside just as Daniel turned to him, not missing a beat. We welcome Mr. Bell to provide clarification on the role he sees himself playing within Monroe Industries. It wasn't a welcome. It was an invitation to sink. Noah walked slowly to the head of the room, his shoes unusually loud against the wood. He set the folder down. Didn't open it. I won't take much of your time, he began, voice steady. I know how valuable it is. No one smiled. He nodded more to himself than anyone. You want to know who I am, why I'm here, why someone who cleans floors had the audacity to speak during a billion-dollar meeting. One of the board members shifted in her seat, lips pressed into a line. I'm here because I didn't think Noah said I felt. I saw something breaking, and I tried to stop it, the same way I caught a piece of falling glass in the lobby 3 days ago. Same instinct. same hands. He looked at each of them, not flinching. I didn't act out of ambition. I acted because I could help, and because I remembered what it felt like when no one helped me. Someone near the back scoffed quietly. Another scribbled something down. Noah continued. I used to sit at tables like this. I wore tailored suits, gave keynote speeches, signed my name under trade agreements worth more than this entire building. I knew the rules, the power structures, the talking points. And then my wife got sick. He paused. I fought for her. I fought hard. But the system was louder than I was. She died while waiting for the right paperwork to go through, and I walked away. Silence. Not cold this time, heavy. I became a janitor not because I lacked skills, but because I needed to be close to my daughter. I needed quiet. I needed to heal. His voice didn't shake. It didn't rise. But it cut. And now I'm being asked to defend whether I belong, whether I'm safe for your reputation, whether I can be trusted with a title. He glanced at Daniel. You're not asking me to explain what I did. You're asking me to explain why I dared to be visible while wearing a name badge that says custodial. He looked to Serafina. She hadn't moved, but her eyes, they burned. I don't want to be a symbol. I don't want to be a PR campaign. I want to work. I want to use what I know. I want to raise my daughter in a world where competence matters more than costume. He picked up the folder. And if that's not welcome here, I'll go. He turned to leave. But before he could take a step, a voice rang out from the doorway. I'd like to speak. Every head turned. Mr. Zhao stepped into the room flanked by his assistant. No announcement, no appointment, just presence. The board straightened instinctively. Serafina's eyes widened barely but enough to register shock. Zhao walked in slowly, gaze sweeping across the room, then settling on Noah. This is the man who saved our deal, Zhao said, voice calm but unmistakably firm. He didn't do it by flattering me or by quoting policy. He did it because he understood me, my language, my values, my silences. He turned to the board. And if Monroe Industries cannot find a seat for someone like this, then I question whether this company truly understands the world it's trying to grow into. Daniel's lips parted, but no sound came out. Zhao smiled just faintly. I'm not here to advise. I'm here to witness. He nodded once toward Noah, then turned and walked out without another word. The room stayed frozen. Then Serafina stepped forward. I move that Mr. Bell be officially appointed as Strategic Cultural Advisor to the CEO, effective immediately. Noah opened his mouth to protest, but she didn't look at him. She looked at the board. And if anyone still has a problem with that, I suggest they question why they're uncomfortable with truth spoken in a different uniform. She sat. One by one, the board members lowered their pens. Noah didn't speak again. He didn't need to. The room had heard him, and for the first time in years he felt the air shift around him not with scrutiny, but with space, the kind you step into and grow. The Monroe headquarters looked different that afternoon. Same glass walls, same modern lines, same expensive silence humming through every floor. But something in the air had shifted. Not loud, not sudden, just enough for people to stand a little straighter. Speak a little softer, like the building had exhaled and wasn't quite sure what came next. In the East Wing, where Monroe hosted cultural events for staff and partners, the executive tea room was unusually lively. For once, the room wasn't filled with suits and scripted smiles. Instead, there were employees with name tags from every floor, every department, IT, accounting, logistics, legal. Some brought family. Some just wandered in out of curiosity. At the center of the room, a long table stretched with bowls of fruit, tiny cake sandwiches cut into precise triangles, and a dozen kinds of tea, each labeled in both English and Mandarin. The placard read, Bridging Cultures Building Trust, Staff Appreciation Luncheon. Noah stood off to the side near the bookshelf. No badge, no clipboard, just watching. He wasn't used to being part of these things. For years, he'd been the guy vacuuming confetti after the lights dimmed. Now, people nodded as they passed him, smiled. A few said thank you. Some didn't even recognize him without the janitor uniform. But one voice cut through everything. Is this the man who saves the world with a mop? Noah turned. Sadie stood in the doorway holding the hand of a young intern who had helped escort her up from the lobby. She wore a yellow dress with sparkly shoes and had her curls tied in 2 uneven pigtails. I think you're mixing me up with a superhero, he said. She grinned. You're my superhero? He knelt and hugged her tight. You made it. The lady in the shiny jacket said I could come because I'm a VIP. Oh, did she? Sadie nodded, then whispered loudly, What's a VIP? He laughed. It means you're very important. She glanced around. I want to say something. You do. Sadie's eyes sparkled. You said people remember words if you speak from your heart. He felt something catch in his chest. I did say that. Before he could say more, a woman with a mic approached. Mr. Bell, the CEO asked if your daughter would like to say a few words. It's informal, just a small thank you moment. Noah looked down at Sadie. You sure? Sadie nodded, serious as ever. I practiced. A few minutes later, Serafina took the mic and addressed the room. Today isn't about policies or performance metrics. It's about people, about trust, and about remembering that the best insights don't always come from resumes. Sometimes they come from lived lives and quiet courage. She turned toward the stage. And now, someone very special has asked to speak. Please welcome Sadie Bell. The room applauded softly as Sadie walked to the front, guided by Serafina herself. Sadie stood on a small step stool to reach the microphone. She looked out at the crowd with the fearless confidence only a 6-year-old can carry. My name is Sadie. My daddy is Noah. He cleans stuff, but he also helps people talk when they don't understand each other. A quiet ripple of warmth moved through the crowd. Sadie continued. At home, Daddy always stops to help people, even when they drop stuff or don't say thank you. One time he helped a man who didn't know how to ask for directions, and another time he helped a bird stuck in a fence. A few chuckles. I didn't know he was famous until the TV people showed up, but I always knew he was good. She reached into the small tote bag slung across her shoulder and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I drew this for him. But I want everyone to see. She held it up. The same drawing from the kitchen fridge crayon strokes of a man pushing a mop under stars with the words, Sometimes the cleanest people are those who see the most dirt. The crowd fell silent. Sadie glanced at her father. I love you, Daddy. Noah felt the floor shift beneath him. Not literally, just enough to make him remember where his center was. The applause came gently. No one shouted. No one clapped out of obligation. It was soft, sincere, like the room had collectively realized they were witnessing something purer than a PR campaign. Serafina stepped beside Sadie and whispered something only she could hear. Sadie nodded, beaming, and returned to her seat with a cookie in hand. Later, when the event began to wind down, Serafina found Noah near the window. She's remarkable, she said. She's my compass. They looked out across the city skyline. Dusk was coming, casting everything in amber and rose gold. I used to think the most valuable asset in business was time, Serafina said quietly. Now, I think it's trust. Noah didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at her with something that wasn't admiration or even gratitude. It was recognition. You're not who I expected, either, he said. Serafina's expression softened almost enough to be called a smile. My mother once told me, she said that when you don't know who to trust, look for the person doing the right thing when no one's watching. Noah turned to her. Did you? She nodded, slowly. I did. And for the first time since that deal began, neither of them looked away. The storm didn't arrive with thunder. It came quietly like most betrayals do. It began with a memo, Not official, just an internal flag forwarded from someone in the PR department to someone in legal, then somehow landing in Serafina's inbox without a subject line. A PDF attachment. 2 lines highlighted. She opened it during a late-night review of project timelines. The room was still the lights dimmed. Her tea had long gone cold. The subject line read, "Leak to media traced to internal source." The second line, anonymous email, originated from inside Monroe HQ. Device registered to PR Director's Assistant, terminal time stamped 04:12 a.m., 2 days before board convening. Serafina's hand froze on the trackpad. She clicked back fast, pulled up access logs, then pulled the archived metadata on the original article from the business blog that broke the janitor story first. Matching timestamps. Same phrasing. It wasn't just a coincidence. It was a setup. Someone inside her own team had leaked Noah's background and orchestrated the timing, deliberately sparking public pressure ahead of the board vote. Not to elevate him, but to corner her. She leaned back in her chair, pulse loud in her ears. It was a tactical move, an ugly one, and it had worked at least until Zhao had walked in and flipped the boardroom upside down. She didn't need a full audit to know who was behind it. Only one person in PR had both the access and the motive. Daniel Cross. He'd tried to undermine her leadership before, quietly, always under the guise of policy. But this was different. He'd gambled with trust, with people, with truth. And now she had to decide what came next. She was still staring at the screen when her office door opened. It was Noah. He paused when he saw her face. What happened? She motioned him in, still processing. I found the source of the leak. Noah stepped closer, reading the lines on the screen. He didn't speak right away. You knew it was internal, I suspected. I just didn't want to believe it. He studied her carefully. So now what? She looked up at him, something raw, flickering beneath her calm exterior. Now, I have to prove it without blowing up the trust I just started to build. Noah nodded, quiet, thoughtful. Then he set something down on her desk. A USB drive. I think this helps, he said. She looked at it. What is it? Footage. Night maintenance cam east stairwell. I spotted Daniel's assistant accessing the secure terminal. After hours, I flagged it just in case. Pulled the feed before IT scrubbed it for the week. She stared at him. You kept this. I don't forget the feeling of being silenced, he said softly. And I don't want to see someone else manipulated into it. Serafina picked up the drive, fingers curling tightly around it. A beat passed. She stood and walked to the glass wall behind her, looking out into the night. Lights shimmered like distant answers. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter. Why did you really stay in that janitor role all these years? Noah didn't answer right away. Then he moved to stand beside her. Because grief makes you afraid of being known. And being invisible felt safer than being misunderstood. She turned to face him fully now. You're not invisible anymore. He met her gaze. Calm. Honest. And neither are you. Something passed between them. Then something without words, without roles, without performance. Just 2 people standing on the edge of the same truth that silence protects, but it also buries. Serafina exhaled. This changes things. If I expose Daniel, it'll fracture the board. Again. Noah shrugged. Sometimes things need to break before they get built right. She looked at him. Really looked. Not as a janitor, not as a strategic advisor, just as a man who had walked through fire and chose somehow to keep walking. Will you be in the office tomorrow? She asked. He nodded. Sadie's at school. I'll be here. Good, she said, because I think we're going to need your voice. He turned to leave, but paused in the doorway. Serafina. She glanced up. I'm not just a translator. Her lips curled into a shadow of a smile. I know. He started to turn again, but her voice stopped him one more time. Noah. He looked back. You were a lead architect on the ASEAN debt relief framework, weren't you? The agreement that stabilized 4 emerging markets. His expression didn't change. 18 billion, 145 clauses. It nearly fell apart over a missed tone in a single phrase. She raised a brow. Which phrase? We will forgive debt under honorable terms. And what was the mistranslation? He smiled faintly. They thought it meant, we will demand debt be repaid to maintain honor. She stared at him, then whispered, language really is everything. He nodded. Exactly. And then he left. Serafina sat alone, holding the USB drive, the city glowing quietly behind her. She had a choice to make. But for the first time in her career, she wasn't thinking about fallout. She was thinking about integrity, and the man who reminded her what it looked like when someone did the right thing, not for applause, but because it was simply right. The rain came without warning. One minute, the sky was bruised with soft gray, and the next, the city outside Monroe HQ blurred behind sheets of water. The glass windows on the 41st floor turned into pale mirrors, catching flashes of lightning and the shimmer of headlights far below. It was late. Everyone had gone home hours ago. But 2 figures remained. Noah stood near the far window jacket, off sleeves rolled to his elbows, watching the rain chase itself down the glass. The city was quieter this high up. Below, horns and sirens might be screaming, but up here all you could hear was your breath. Behind him, Serafina paced slowly with a cup of untouched tea in her hand. She hadn't spoken since forwarding the security footage to legal, since making the call that would officially remove Daniel Cross from his position. The fallout had begun. And yet for once, she didn't feel like she was falling. She stopped a few feet behind Noah and looked at his reflection in the window. He looked calm. But she'd learned by now not to trust stillness. Sometimes people were quiet because they were fighting to hold themselves together. This room was designed for sunset meetings, she said finally. But I think it's better in the rain. Noah didn't turn. He just nodded. You can see what matters more clearly when everything else is blurred. She walked slowly to stand beside him. He glanced sideways. You ever wonder why people don't look out windows as much anymore? Because they're always looking at screens, she replied. No, he said, because windows don't filter what's real. She let out a breath that wasn't quite a laugh. You always talk like that. Only when I'm standing beside the CEO during a thunderstorm. He turned toward her. She was watching the rain, her posture softer than usual, like something heavy had been unhooked from her spine. She looked at him. Really looked. Then asked, have you ever thought about falling in love again? The question hit him like a note in the wrong key, unexpected, disarming. He blinked once. That's not something I usually hear at work. She didn't smile. I'm not asking, as your boss. He was quiet for a long time. Then he leaned his shoulder gently against the window and looked down at the streets below. I used to think I wasn't allowed to, he said softly. That love was a one-time gift. And I got my share. Because of your wife. He nodded. There was a moment after she died, he said, where every sound in the world felt like an insult. The laughter in restaurants. The wind chimes on someone's porch. Even Sadie's giggles felt too big, like they didn't belong in a house that had lost her mother. Serafina didn't interrupt. I told myself I was done, that my life would just be quiet now. Clean. Predictable. And is it? She asked gently. He looked over at her rainlight casting soft silver along her cheekbones. No, he said. It hasn't been quiet since you pulled me into that hallway. They stood there, 2 people tethered by something neither of them could define, both unwilling to speak too fast for fear of breaking the spell. I never believed in starting over, Serafina said, her voice barely above a whisper. Not really. I've always been the kind of person who builds from the wreckage, never from scratch. Isn't that the same thing? She shook her head. Starting over means letting go of what you were. I've never known how to do that. He hesitated, then said, "You don't have to let go. You just have to make space." For what? For something that wasn't part of the plan. They stood close enough now to hear each other's breathing. Serafina turned toward him fully. Her voice was soft but steady. "I'm not easy. I'm not afraid. I've been hurt. So have I. I don't know if I remember how to be open. Then we'll learn slow," he said, like learning a new language. A pause. A shift. Then a sound from across the room broke the moment. "Daddy." They both turned. Sadie stood in the doorway holding her stuffed koala, rubbing her eyes. "I had a bad dream," she whispered. "I couldn't find you." Noah crossed to her quickly and knelt. "I'm right here, sweetheart. I'm not going anywhere." She nodded sleepily, then noticed Serafina behind him. "Hi," she said, blinking. Serafina crouched beside them. "Hi, Sadie. It's nice to see you again." "You look like my mommy," the girl said, completely sincere. Serafina blinked, caught off guard. "Oh. Wow. I mean the way she looked at my daddy. Before he got sad." Noah's breath caught in his throat. Serafina reached out gently. "That's a really kind thing to say." Sadie nodded solemnly. "You can come over for waffles if you want." "I'd like that," Serafina whispered. Noah picked Sadie up, holding her close. She tucked her head into his neck, already drifting back to sleep. As he turned back toward the window, Serafina was still watching him, not with calculation or control, but something warm. Steady. "Would you have said yes?" She asked if I had asked you to start again. He looked at her over Sadie's sleeping head. "I wouldn't have known how to," he said. She stepped closer. "But I'd have tried." And in the glow of city lights and soft thunder beyond the glass, something shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just enough to feel like the beginning of something new. The morning of the announcement arrived without drama. No buzz, no scandals, no urgent emails flagged in red. Just a clean, silver-gray Manhattan skyline and a quiet hum that ran through the Monroe building like anticipation holding its breath. At 10 a.m. sharp, the same glass conference room where it all began filled again. Only this time the mood was different. Not tense, not performative. Something quieter, grounded. The investors were already seated. So were key partners. Senior executives lined the wall, many still unsure what exactly had been planned for this press event, only that Serafina Monroe had personally requested their presence. Noah stood just outside the room adjusting the cuffs of his shirt, no tie-clean navy blazer. Sadie had picked the color saying it matched the sky when everything feels safe. He smiled at the memory, then took a slow breath and walked in. The room fell silent the moment he entered. It wasn't fear, it wasn't awe, it was recognition. Serafina followed moments later, black dress, crisp hair, loose today, a small signal to those who watched too closely that this was not business as usual. She stepped up to the podium but didn't begin with numbers or milestones or shareholder updates. She began with a story. Not long ago, a deal that mattered deeply to this company was on the verge of collapse. Miscommunication, cultural disconnect, and lack of trust threatened everything we had built. What saved that deal wasn't technology or clever spin. It was a voice. A voice we almost didn't hear because we never thought to ask. She turned slightly and looked at Noah, her gaze steady. "Today, I want to formally introduce someone who has reminded us what it means to listen. To bridge. To repair trust, not just contracts." Noah Bell. The room applauded, not out of politeness, but because it was true. Noah stepped forward a little slower than most would. Not hesitant, just deliberate. He didn't shuffle papers. He didn't clear his throat. He simply spoke. "I was once a man who believed in systems. Trade, diplomacy structure. I spent most of my early career designing frameworks meant to prevent exploitation across borders. I believed with all my heart that if we just spoke the right language, if we respected context, deals would hold. People would be protected. He paused. Then I lost someone. Not to illness, but to silence. To a system that saw her as a number on a form. That's when I stopped speaking. A hush swept across the room. I took a job that let me be invisible, that let me tuck my grief into corners and buckets and floor polish. But the truth is, what we try to bury finds its way out. And sometimes what we think is just cleaning is actually listening. He looked around, eyes steady. I didn't mean to step into that meeting room. I wasn't looking for a promotion or a microphone. I just saw something I understood, and I stepped forward. And in doing that, I remembered something I'd forgotten my voice has value. Not because of my degrees or the boards I've sat on, but because of what I've lived. He took a breath. And what I've learned. Now, every eye in the room was locked on him. I've learned that titles don't teach you empathy, that strategy without humanity is just theater, and that sometimes the person holding the mop sees more clearly than the person holding the agenda. A soft ripple of acknowledgement spread through the room. Executives glanced at one another. Even a few investors shifted in their seats. Noah continued. Monroe Industries has invited me not just to consult, but to build something new, a strategic expansion rooted in cultural humility, a human-centered lens as we look toward growth in Asia and beyond. And I've said yes, because I believe this company is ready to lead differently, not louder, but wiser. He stepped back. Silence lingered for a beat. Then came the applause. Longer this time. Not performative. Earned. Serafina returned to the mic but didn't speak right away. She looked at Noah, not like a CEO introducing an employee, but like a human acknowledging another. You once told me, she said softly, that trust begins when someone listens before they speak. Thank you for teaching us how. That afternoon, the internal newsletter read, Noah Bell appointed strategic advisor, leading Human-Centered Expansion Initiative. But that wasn't the story people passed around in elevators and Slack chats. What they talked about was the stillness in the room after he spoke. The way Serafina's voice had dipped into something almost vulnerable. The way people from the lower floors had gathered by the monitors watching it unfold like a story they didn't expect to be part of. Noah didn't linger after the event. He walked out the same way he had come in. But something in the way people looked at him had changed. Not reverence, not curiosity, something better, belonging. As he passed the custodial wing, he stopped. An older janitor named Eugene Gray, hair quiet eyes, looked up from his cart. I saw it, he said. All of it. Noah smiled. Was I too long-winded? You were perfect. They shook hands, and as Noah walked toward the elevator, he glanced down at his keychain still clipped to his belt out of habit. Janitor Bell, U41. He didn't take it off. Not yet, because he knew something now. He wasn't leaving that version of himself behind. He was bringing him forward. 3 weeks later, the elevator opened with a quiet chime on the 16th floor, an area Noah Bell had never once stepped foot in, not even when buffing the marble near the executive wing. He stood alone, holding a slim leather bag in one hand, Sadie's drawing carefully tucked inside. Not for display, just to keep close. The corridor was quiet. Soft, filtered sunlight spilled through wide windows, warming the matte wood floors and cream-colored walls. The air didn't hum with urgency here. It felt still, present, as if the space had been waiting for something, or someone. At the end of the hall, a brushed metal plaque read, Room 16C Strategic Cultural Office. The door was already open. Inside, the space wasn't grand, but it was perfect. A modest desk near the window, bookshelves half-stocked, a small table with 2 chairs and a ceramic tea set that looked unused but carefully chosen. On the wall hung a single-framed print, a calligraphy painting in Mandarin characters. He read it softly under his breath. Patience is not silence. It is presence. Behind him, footsteps approached. He turned just as Serafina appeared in the doorway holding a manila envelope and a warm smile reel, this time not corporate polished. She looked different in the light, softer somehow, grounded. Her blazer was still immaculate, but her posture had changed, like she was no longer trying to brace against the world. "I thought you might want to open it yourself," she said, handing him the envelope. He pulled out the key. Matte silver, smooth, no tag, just a simple 16C etched near the base. "This is yours, now," she said. He looked down at it the way someone might look at a compass, not for the direction it gave, but for the reminder that he had always known where he was going. "Thank you," he said, for what she asked, for seeing past the uniform. She stepped further inside, taking in the room. "You didn't need me to see you. You just needed space to stand." He nodded. Then he reached into his bag and pulled out something small, worn, but polished. A keychain. "Janitor Bell, Marque 41. She read aloud, eyes softening. He handed it to her. "I was going to retire it." But he smiled. "I think it still belongs on my bag. Just on the other side." She looked at him, eyes lingering. There was something in the silence. A question. A door. But this time she didn't walk past it. "Tonight," she said, "we're hosting a gathering. Just staff and family. No speeches, no press. Just people." He raised an eyebrow. "That sounds dangerously human." She laughed. "It's Sadie's idea." "I'm not surprised," he said, slipping the key into his pocket. "She's an HR now, isn't she?" "Informally. Are we invited? We'd be honored." He nodded once. Then, before she could turn to go, he asked quietly, "Do you ever wonder what your younger self would think of all this?" She considered the question, then answered honestly. "I think she'd be relieved to know she didn't have to be perfect to be good." He let that sit, then said, "I think mine would be proud I didn't disappear." She gave a slow smile. He'd be right. That evening, the rooftop terrace of Monroe HQ glowed with soft golden lights. Strings of lanterns danced in the breeze. Long tables were scattered with teacups and story cards in both English and Mandarin. Employees mingled. Children ran between chairs. Laughter echoed where silence had once reigned. At the far end, near a warm-lit table with 3 chairs, Noah sat with Sadie in his lap, her head resting on his shoulder, a little flag in her hand that said, "Be kind, even when no one's watching." Across from them, Serafina watched quietly, one hand wrapped around a cup of jasmine tea. "You okay?" she asked softly. Noah nodded. "This feels real." "It is." He looked over at her. "You did this." She shook her head gently. "We did this." Sadie stirred, blinking up. "Is this what peace feels like?" Noah kissed the top of her head. "It's a pretty good start." A breeze passed through the rooftop, carrying the smell of cinnamon and something warm from the catering trays. In the distance, the skyline shimmered. Not loud, not flashy, just present. And beneath it, all 3 people sat at a table that had once seemed unreachable. Not just as colleagues, but as something better. A family of choice. Noah looked down at his daughter's drawing, which someone had quietly laminated and placed at the center of the table. The stars, the mop, the words. Sometimes the cleanest people are those who see the most dirt. He smiled, then looked across the table at Serafina, her eyes catching the light just so. And without needing to say it, he knew. They had both cleaned more than floors or reputations. They had cleared the space for something rare to grow. Something true. And when the last lantern dimmed and the last laugh faded into the night, Noah locked his new office door for the first time. Key 16C in one hand, keychain 41 in the other. Both parts of him. Whole. Sometimes the people we overlook are the ones holding the quietest kind of wisdom. And sometimes it takes a storm to show us who was steady all along. If this story moved you even just a little, take a moment to reflect. Have you ever met someone like Noah? Or maybe you are someone like Noah, someone who gives quietly, who listens when no one else does, someone who sees the world not for what it pretends to be, but for what it can become. We'd love to hear your story. Have you ever witnessed an act of silent strength, a moment of kindness that changed everything? Share it with us in the comments below. We read every single one. And while you're there, tell us where you're watching from. Whether you're curled up in Chicago, sipping tea in the Yorkshire countryside, or listening from a quiet cafe in Seoul, we're so grateful to have you here. If this story touched your heart, make sure to like, subscribe, and tap the notification bell so you never miss a tale that just might restore your faith in humanity. Because here on this channel, we believe in hope, in healing, and in stories that remind us that the smallest voices often carry the greatest truths. Thank you for spending this time with us. Until next time, take care of yourself, take care of each other, and never stop believing in the quiet power of good people.